right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Welcome to the panel on women, refugees, and why law matters. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, great. Okay. Well, we're going to be passing the mic down, so if folks can't hear, just like wildly gesticulate in the back, and we'll figure it out. We have a few more folks who are trickling in. Hey, do you want to just pull up a chair? I think we're short a few chairs, but hopefully we will sort this out. No, well, there are some. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for joining us for this, what I hope will be a fantastic conversation with this great group of really thought-provoking speakers we have here with us today. And I'm just going to quickly introduce them, and then I'll pose some questions to the group so that we can just start the conversation, and we're hoping to leave a bunch of time for questions from everybody. So this is Deborah Anker. She's the founder and director of the Immigration and Refugee Clinic here at Harvard, and she's a clinical professor of law. Next, we have Nancy Kelly, who's co-director of the Immigration and Refugee Clinic at Greater Boston Legal Services and a lecturer on law here at Harvard as well. We have the Honorable Judge Stahl, who's a federal judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit. We have Marina Basius, who is an asylum officer in Chicago with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And next we have Susan Lee, who is a staff immigration attorney at Queens Law Associates, a public defender's office in New York. Beth Nerling-Sotiriou, I tried, who's a staff attorney in the Detained Children's Program at the Capital Area Immigrants' Rights Coalition, the CARE Coalition in Washington, D.C. We have Jane Millay, who's one of our former clients. She was granted asylum in 2009 and became a citizen in 2015. She's on the board at Greater Boston Legal Services and works for an executive recruiting firm here in Boston. And next to her, there's Uzra Azizi, who is also a former client of ours. She was granted asylum in 2012 and now works as a development specialist at Ropes & Gray, where she also assists with pro bono immigration cases. And after her, there's Fatma Maroof, who is a professor of law and director of the Immigrants' Rights Clinic at Texas A&M School of Law. And then Mark Fleming, who's vice chair of WilmerHale's appellate and Supreme Court litigation practice. Suyapa Perez, who is also a former client of ours, who is going to have to duck out early because she's graduating from massage therapy school like at 5:30, so must attend graduation. And next to her we have Mary Huey, who's going to be interpreting for her today. And then we have Julina Guo, who is an agency attorney at the New York City Commission on Human Rights. And I think we have one more client who is on her way, Idiatu Balde, who should be here shortly. So thank you guys all for joining us for this conversation. I'm just going to start it off by throwing some questions out there that you guys could choose to answer or not. But I think what we were hoping to talk about in part was what are some of the challenges that women who are seeking asylum face here in presenting their claims for protection. How, if at all, is the situation changing under the current administration? How can lawyers and law students get involved in working with women refugees? So,
I'm going to talk a little bit about the development of gender asylum law here, and Nancy's going to partner with me in that. So formal changes in the law are often slow to emerge. Gender asylum serves as an important reminder that formal law, typically set forth in statutes, regulations, in precedent-setting high court or administrative decisions, is not the sole source of legal authority and often not where legal change is born. Through direct representation, bringing many individual cases and presenting arguments often grounded in informal, non-binding but persuasive sources, unpublished administrative decisions, national and international gender guidelines, for example, Our clinic, along with others, many of whom in this audience, has helped shape the thinking of decision makers, change the culture of legal institutions, and put pressure on higher level decision makers. The result is a body of gender asylum law developed in large part at the adjudicatory level, legal change from the bottom up. For example, our clinic now wins many cases involving relational or what's called domestic violence. This was unheard of in the 1980s, 1990s, the early years of U.S. asylum law, when any sexual harm to a woman was dismissed as a purely private matter, not worthy of international recognition and protection. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, collaboration across borders among women's human rights activists, immigration rights activists, and scholars led to positive change. During this period, the Harvard Women's Refugee Project was formed, growing out of a partnership among our clinic, Greater Boston Legal Services, originally Cambridge and Somerville Legal Services, and the Harvard Human Rights Program, to advocate in various ways and before different bodies for a gender-informed interpretation of refugee law. In 1993, Canada issued its historic gender asylum guidelines for adjudicators, and following the Canadian lead, in 1995, we presented similar ones to the U.S. government, and they were adopted. This was preceded by a concerted effort in the press, and women journalists at the New York Times, the Washington Post, many women's magazines, among others, interviewed and told in detail the very powerful stories of our clients.
Hi. I'm just going to build a little bit on what Debbie just talked about and talk about three things that came together where we tried to advocate on different levels to try to really create a sea change rather than trying to change the law from above, but to set the groundwork below to try to change things. One was the guidelines, which talked about a set of guidelines worked with a number of organizations around the country on drafting, actually presenting to immigration, and they were adopted in the spring of 1995. Basically recognizing gender-specific harm as persecution and recognizing that harm because of your gender can be a basis for asylum. At the same time, we need law. We need something to argue regarding the gender-based harm, and at that time, there was a systemic pattern of rape of political reasons. And what we did was, again, in coalition with a number of other organizations, we collected stories of individual women subjected to rape, and we came up with about 150 stories, both working with people across the United States who were seeking protection here. We took to the Organization of American States, to the Human Rights Commission, and we got a finding that in that context, rape was torture, which we were able then to bring back to our cases here to argue that it was then necessarily persecution. The third thing was that we advocated for the publication of a previously unpublished decision which recognized rape as torture. It was a decision by the Board of Immigration Appeals. But at that time, and still, much of the law in this area is invisible, right? It's unpublished decisions by an administrative board. So we were able to convince them through a national effort to publish that. So those three things came together, which set the foundation for then going into court, to immigration court, and arguing on behalf of women. We began to get decisions on various issues, including domestic violence as a basis for asylum. And there was a very, very lengthy battle that ensued after a decision was, or a case was denied by the board to a woman seeking protection on domestic violence in 1999. And that got the public face of domestic violence as a basis for asylum derailed for about 11 years while that case was kicked up and down. But on the ground level, through a lot of a real, again, working in coalition, we were able to get that decision vacated and really hold it back until finally 11 years later that woman was granted asylum albeit in an unpublished decision. I'm supposed to be done. Anyway, just to sort of a very quick sum up, throughout that entire time, because that decision didn't stand and because we had that foundation, we were able to win individual cases for women because we were able to change the way that the courts looked at these cases and looked at the circumstances of women. And just as we were sitting down to this panel, we got an email that there was a decision made by the First Circuit today, and the underlying case, I haven't had a chance to read it, I was trying to scroll through it just now, but the underlying harm to the woman who appears to be about to be granted asylum, her case was remanded back, is domestic violence. So, little by little.
Well, in my job, I see it at the end, and what is at the end often is determined by what was at the beginning. And therefore, many times where I will see a case and say, if they had only put this into evidence, if they had only understood that you could frame this differently, I would have a better chance at trying to come to a result that I think is just. And I think that's part of the problem, that when you sit in my seat, when you look at these cases, you have to look at the case which has come to you. And many times it has come to you ill-prepared, ill thought out, and the right issues have not been raised. And when they are not raised, that's how you tend to get bad law, perhaps, over a period of time, because we decide the cases we have. And it is critically important that the bar understands the issues and the best way to present the case for the asylum seeker. And I think that is a fundamental issue that needs to be really discussed. People need to be better prepared, and so that we can perhaps get the right answer to these very difficult and important questions.
So I want to focus my remarks today on a growing problem in both USCIS and immigration courts, which is backlogs. Is that better? Okay. So I work at the Chicago Asylum Office, so I'm going to focus on backlogs in the asylum program. There are currently 270,000 pending asylum cases nationally. About 12,000 new applications are filed every year. These are historic receipt numbers that the asylum program has not seen since the mid-1990s. There's 500 asylum officers nationally, but it's important to note that not all of them are working on affirmative asylum caseloads. At the Chicago Asylum Office, there's 50 officers, and half of them are almost working exclusively on credible and reasonable fear screenings. Under the regulations, USCIS should conduct an interview within 45 days of an application being filed, and should adjudicate the case within 6 months of the application being filed. But the agency is nowhere close to meeting these goals. At the Chicago Asylum Office, we're currently interviewing applications filed in 2015. The Los Angeles office is interviewing applications filed all the way back in 2013. And these delays are problematic, especially for the asylum applicants. During these delays, they're living with uncertainty about how to plan for the next steps in their lives. They also live with fear that they could be potentially sent back to a country where they fear persecution. And this is also true for the applicant's family members, who are also potentially living back in the home country. Often during an asylum interview, we find out that the applicant's spouse or children are still living in the home country, often in hiding or under threat of persecution because of their familial relationship with the applicant. Another issue with delays is that if the applicant is unrepresented, they may not know that they have to report their change of address, or they may not know how to report their change of address with USCIS. If they don't do that, they don't get their interview notice, they don't show up for their interview. And this affects the backlog numbers. For example, in June of this year, USCIS scheduled 10,000 affirmative asylum interviews, but only 6,000 interviews were actually conducted. 1,000 were interview no-shows, 2,000 were rescheduled by applicants, and 1,000 were canceled by USCIS. And to conclude, I just wanted to make a comment about the work that asylum officers do. With the number of filings And the growing backlog, this translates into increasing workloads for asylum officers. This past fiscal year, I was interviewing 7 affirmative asylum interviews every week, but with this year, it's going to rise to about 10 interviews a week. And these are exhausting interviews. They can range anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, depending on the complexity of the case. They're undoubtedly emotionally exhausting for the applicant, but also for the officer. And so it's always a struggle to maintain the appropriate balance between conducting a non-adversarial, sensitive interview and also an efficient interview, especially important when you're dealing with gender asylum claims, where you don't want the applicant to feel like they're being rushed through their experiences, talking about sensitive topics like domestic violence, sexual trauma, or FGM.
Hi, I'd like to focus my remarks on the interaction between the criminal and the immigration system, specifically to do with asylum applicants, but also women asylum applicants. I think because asylum and refugee law comes from, the source of that law comes from such a highly held universal value that people who fear being persecuted for their basic core identities shouldn't be sent back to their countries. Sometimes we forget that asylum is a discretionary application, and that discretion comes in very heavily when there's a criminal record attached. Due to a lot of factors, for asylum applicants in general, but specifically women, including lack of access to legal resources. When someone steps off a plane or crosses a border, they're coming into a whole new country. They're not familiar with the laws. They're not familiar with the nonprofits that may be able to help them pro bono. They may be defrauded in certain unscrupulous transactions. They also have lack of community, family ties, so they have nowhere else to turn to in terms of support that way. And most importantly, there's a lack of legal work authorization, which leaves them in a very vulnerable position where they often find themselves in vulnerable and abusive employment or domestic situations because there is no legal way for them to pursue work. In New York, where I practice, specifically in Queens, a lot of Asian women asylum applicants fall into these types of situations where they work often in unlicensed massage parlors or fall into abusive domestic relationships. And with inner city excessive poverty offense policing, a lot of these women come into contact with the criminal justice system. And when they are in legal limbo due to the backlog for such a long time and their applications are pending for such a long time, the amount of contact they may have with the criminal justice system may increase. And all of that record comes into play when they go in front of the immigration judge or in front of an asylum officer who, in their discretion, looking over someone's record, may deny that application. So a lot of these systematic factors come into play to much harmful and disastrous effect for women refugees.
I want to talk a little bit about Sabi's second question, which is how, if at all, have things changed with the new administration. To give a little context to my what I'm about to say, I work in ORR shelters with children. So the population that I'm working with now are individuals designated as unaccompanied alien children, which are basically kids primarily who have just entered and crossed the border without status, who are under 18 and have come without a parent or legal guardian. When they cross and are apprehended by ICE, they're then within 3 days sent into shelters that are, or detention centers that are supposed to be child-friendly. And these children are in the shelters for sometimes a few weeks and sometimes for several years. while they're waiting for their immigration process, and also while they're waiting to be reunified with a family member or family friend. So some of the big changes that we've seen in this new administration have less to deal with the laws and more to deal with the policies and how government is treating both these children and how the government is treating other immigrant populations that really affects the reality for these kids. So first, how the government is treating these kids is we're getting a lot more backlash. A lot of times, because children are waiting for the reunification process, when we go to immigration court, we're basically asking the judge for more time to allow that process to happen. But we're now getting a lot of backlash from the Department of Homeland Security, which is saying, no, a child needs to make an application, needs to send something now. There's a lot more contention in court, whereas previously, because you're dealing with, I think some arguably say the most vulnerable of the most vulnerable immigrant kids here. I have clients who are a few months old. I've represented a kid in front of the judge who was I think he was 9 months. And we're now seeing that they're not being treated differently than adults, which is a huge problem. Additionally, in terms of how some of the other administrative policies have affected these kids, is that because of the raids that are going on, because of the increase in ICE enforcement that is happening, there is a larger fear, a much more palpable fear within the immigrant community of coming forward in any way for the government. And so these children who are detained while they're waiting for a family member to come forward and sponsor them. Basically say, I will take responsibility of the child. They can live with me. I'll provide their education. I'll make sure they go to court while they're going through this process. A lot of these people are undocumented and don't have status. And now, because of the increased fear throughout the immigration community, because of increased enforcements, children are languishing in detention much longer, and some are even choosing voluntary departure to go back to a dangerous community or a dangerous situation in their home country because they're facing pretty much indefinite detention.
So I'm just going to interrupt the sequence because Suyapa's got to go graduate. So Jane, do you mind passing the mic? Thanks.
Yo no estoy acostumbrada a usar un micrófono. Espero que me escuchen.
I'm not accustomed to using a microphone, so I hope you can hear me.
You might want to give it to Mary.
Mi nombre es Suyapa González de Pérez y soy la quinta hija de 6 que tuvo mi padre Jesús González y María.
My name is Suyapa Gonzalez Perez, and I am the 5th daughter of 6 children.
Y yo nací en Honduras.
And I was born in Honduras.
Y soy ciudadana del Reino de Jesucristo.
And I am a citizen of Jesus Christ.
Y espero que pronto de Estados Unidos también.
And hopefully of the United States as well.
Tengo actualmente 55 años de edad.
I'm 55 years old.
Y soy madre de 3 hermosos, toda madre dice esto, de 3 hermosos muchachos.
And I am the mother of 3 beautiful children. All mothers say that.
2 varones y una niña.
Two boys and 1 girl.
Juan Carlos, Pavel y Victoria.
Juan Carlos, Pablo y Victoria.
Y soy esposa de Vicente Pérez, un hombre muy trabajador.
And I'm the wife of Vicente, a very good worker.
Hemos estado casados por casi 30 años.
We've been married for over 30 years.
Bastante tiempo, gracias a Dios. Y siempre, toda mi vida, he sido fascinada de la justicia social.
And my whole life I've been fascinated with social justice.
Desde pequeña estuve en grupos de la directiva de grado, de la escuela, del colegio.
Since I was little, I've always been involved in school and work.
Y no cambió cuando me gradué de maestra.
And it didn't change when I graduated from being a teacher.
Y pertenecía al sindicato de maestros.
And I was part of the teachers union.
Y cuando fui a la universidad tampoco cambió.
And when I went to the university, I didn't change then either.
Estuve en el grupo de los estudiantes, los accionistas dentro de la universidad que forman esta directiva para pelear por sus derechos y todo eso.
I was part of the student group at the university that
Estuve en ese grupo que pelea por los derechos de los estudiantes.
a group that fought for students' rights.
Y así ha sido toda mi vida. He estado en grupos de mujeres que pelean por sus derechos.
And that's the way it's always been. You know, I've been in part of groups for women's rights.
Maestros que pelean también por sus derechos.
Teachers who fought for their rights.
Y por los niños también.
And for children as well.
Y todo este trabajo voluntario de luchar en contra de la tiranía y la opresión en mi país.
And all this work to fight against the tyranny in my home country.
Me trajo grandes enemigos.
I got many enemies.
Y estos enemigos eran muy poderosos.
And these enemies were very powerful.
Ya que no solamente eran poderosos políticamente, sino que también económicos.
Not only politically powerful, but also economically.
Y fue así como en el 2003 tuve que venir con mi familia para acá.
And that's why in 2003 I came here with my family.
Se podrán imaginar cambiar todo.
And, you know, it changed everything.
Un lenguaje diferente.
A different language.
Pueden ver mi discurso escrito en inglés,
You can see that I've written this in English,
pero soy incapaz de hablarlo.
but I'm unable to speak it.
Porque tengo el lenguaje español en el corazón y el de inglés en la mente.
Because I have Spanish in the heart and English in the head.
Confío en Dios que algún día va a pasar para acá en inglés.
Hopefully the English will come to the heart.
Pero en este momento agradezco mucho su trabajo.
Oh. Thank you for your work.
Y la paciencia de ustedes de escucharme en español.
And the patience for you all to listen to me in Spanish.
Y como les decía, al llegar aquí, como todo inmigrante, tuve que trabajar en cocinas, cuidando niños.
And when I came here as an immigrant, you know, I've been working in the kitchen, working with children,
En cualquier cosa.
whatever thing,
A pesar de que soy maestra,
even though I'm a teacher.
soy bachiller en ciencias sociales.
I have a bachelor.
A pesar de todo eso, tuve que trabajar en lo más duro en este país.
Despite all that, I've had to work, you know, in the most difficult jobs.
Pero encontré una
She can have my time. Let her keep going, please.
Encontré una comunidad muy bella en Chelsea,
I found a beautiful community in Chelsea.
en la iglesia San Lucas, en la colaborativa de Chelsea,
In the Chelsea Collaborative, the St. Lucas Church,
los cuales me conectaron con la clínica de Harvard, la clínica de inmigración de Harvard,
and they connected me with the Harvard Immigration Clinic.
y formaron un maravilloso trabajo, hicieron un maravilloso trabajo,
And they did a beautiful job.
a tal grado que tengo la residencia permanente en este momento.
And now I have permanent residence.
Mis hijos, les quiero mostrar esto porque este es producto de ustedes.
My children, I want to show you because this is a product of you all.
Este es el título de mi hijo Pavel.
That's He's a civil engineer,
Y está estudiando para sacar la maestría
and he's studying for his master's.
en ingeniería metálica, algo así. Estructural. En ingeniería estructural. Mi hijo está en este momento estudiando para eso.
Right now, he's studying for that.
Mi hija también se va a graduar en diciembre.
Her daughter's going to. My daughter's going to graduate in December as well.
De algo de computación.
Ciencias de la tecnología.
Algo, ciencias de la tecnología. Y yo, en este momento, gracias al trabajo de todos ustedes, voy para mi graduación.
And now, thanks to you all.
Gracias. Bye. Felicitaciones. Happy graduation. Yay. We tried to convince her graduation was more important than coming here, and it didn't work. So she's doing both. So
That's a hard act to follow, but
I don't know if that one's working so well. You want to take this one?
thank you. I'm Jane. I got asylum, like Sabi mentioned. I think I can't even remember the year, but when I got asylum, I thought my life was great, but it was actually the beginning of another life here. And I found a lot of challenges through navigating the system, whether it was through mass health, whether it's the food stamps, and just going through my daughter's school. It was a new country to me. Just counting the coins was a problem for me, just the homework. But with great help, Sabi and the Harvard immigration team just following up with me and checking how I was doing, I was able to be referred to many places and got to know a lot of things. But as I was going through this system, I realized there are a lot of people who are not privileged like me. There are women who, once you come to your community and just stay in that community, you just don't know where mass health is, where you get your food stamps, and just taking your child to school. So I started a program where I'm able to give people clothing so that your clothes are the last. When you're taking your child to school, you don't have to worry about clothes, because I know the system here is hard. I mean, even just going to Walmart was hard for me. So with that, I was able to dedicate my time to these women and let them know that with just your clothing, I'm so nervous right now that I'm so nervous. I'm sorry. But just coming through with the asylum myself, just being an asylee and going through the process of asylum, getting my my green card, and then now becoming a citizenship has taught me a lot. And I'm able to now give back to the community and help women, because I know it is hard out here. The systems with the funding being cut, just even getting the privilege of coming through Harvard, the doors are harder to come through. So I'm able to help people. I'm so nervous. I'm sorry, Sabi.
You're awesome, Jane. Thank you.
So most of what I'm about to share has already been shared to some extent by the fellow panelists here. My asylum was granted in 2012, and it was all due to the great work Sabi and her team did on that. It took, I would say, a little over a year and a half. I was a student at the time at College of Holy Cross, and I would commute from Worcester. And that was quite challenging, because sometimes you would have to meet probably 2 times a week, and then I would have to arrange that while working on campus. But I initially hadn't planned on staying in the U.S. when I came as a student in 2008. So after asylum was granted, now I had to plan my life out after that in the U.S. and what I plan on doing while leaving my family behind in Afghanistan. My first job was actually through the intern that was working on my case, who I'm still in touch with. This was a long time ago. But she was working at a law firm here, and she said there's an open position. I just graduated college in May 2012. And that's how I got my first job, and it was basically through her referral. And the clinic has always been there for me since I've been in touch with them to this day. I always reach out to Sabi, and she's been there for me as a mentor and as a sister and a very good friend. The work they did on my case was very detailed. It was not an easy case. And I learned a lot through it. Now I do pro bono work myself. I did it at my former job, and I do it currently. The most recent case I worked on was an asylum case itself for an Afghan woman. She had an 8-month-old baby. They were in a detention center for 8 months in Texas. So I was involved throughout the process. And because I had been through it myself, I knew which questions to ask and how to prepare her for her hearing. Hers was a defensive case and not an affirmative one. So through that process, I've learned a lot, and it's something I'm really passionate about, and I've always wanted to continue to do it. Other than that, I've also done work on VAWA cases, Violence Against Women Act, so those are domestic abuse cases, and someone mentioned those earlier as well. And from 2012 to now, a lot has changed. The backlog they noted earlier, cases don't get processed as fast as they used to. Mine was filed in January, and it was approved in May, whereas I know a few clients who have filed 3-4 years ago or 2 years ago, and they're still waiting. So those issues are there, and it causes them, as someone mentioned this again earlier, it causes them a lot of difficulties to plan out where they want to go next, what they want to do. If they have an emergency situation where they need to travel, are they able to do that? And then if you want to apply for a travel document, how does that work? How long does that take? The fees that are involved with it, and it's expensive. Just a travel document alone could cost up to $800. So they come from all sorts of backgrounds. Someone is able to afford it, but the person next to them might not be able to. So it's just has been eye-opening to all these challenges recently, and I've been very fortunate to have worked with Sabi and learned a lot through that to be able to give back now and work on these cases. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Fatma Maroof. I teach an immigration clinic in Texas, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the legal challenges that women asylum seekers continue to face. The precedent decision we got in 2014 was a big change, but there are still issues with judges accepting and applying that case, at least where I am in Texas. We see cases still routinely denied for credibility reasons, for very minor inconsistencies. Judges do not understand, these are immigration judges, do not understand very well the impact of trauma on memory. They also continue to deny cases. Probably the hardest part is still finding a protected ground, which is usually a particular social group, one of the 5 grounds for asylum. And even though the one precedent decision we have recognized a particular social group, which was defined as married women who are unable to leave the relationship, we continue to see judges, if that definition doesn't apply perfectly, reject cases. There have been a number of additional cases brought for unmarried women, but we don't have a precedent decision on that yet. Also, what it means to be unable to leave the relationship. And I've had judges deny cases saying, you know, she left to the United States to seek asylum, so she left the relationship. But that makes no sense, or no one would be able to get asylum. Other issues is failure to report to the police. It's another reason asylum is frequently denied, because you have to show that your government in your country of origin is unable or unwilling to protect you. And one of the things the courts look at is, did you report? Many circuits have held that you don't have to report if it would be futile or if it would increase your risk of harm. But we still see cases denied for that. And then establishing the nexus, the connection between the harm and the motive. So basically to show that the person, the woman, say, was abused because of her gender, or at least in part because of her gender, is still a struggle. So these are all ongoing legal issues. We are not seeing any prosecutorial discretion, at least in Texas these days. So these are the types of cases that if they didn't fit perfectly into the asylum framework. It used to be under the Obama administration that often DHS would exercise prosecutorial discretion and just administratively close them. They are not administratively closing any cases now, regardless of how sympathetic the person is, whether they have medical issues or not. And so that's a big difference under this administration as well.
First of all, thank you to Sabi and to everyone for inviting me to be on this panel. My presence here is a bit of an anomaly. I am not a refugee lawyer. I am a generalist. I'm an appellate litigator at a big firm here in Boston. I do a lot of patent cases. I do a lot of securities work, criminal law occasionally, bankruptcy, basically anything that needs to be argued to 3 busy judges in 15 minutes and 60 pages. And so when in this circuit, it's true. It's recently changed to 50. Some of them are still allowing us 60. I think the reason I'm here is because in my pro bono docket, I have done a lot of immigration work over the years. And I think what I would propose to do in the time allotted to me is talk about the second half of the title of this panel, which is why law matters, and a little bit also about why lawyers matter. And some of this has been touched on. It's always seemed to me, and this is probably, you know, a fairly trite observation, certainly for folks who've graduated from this august institution, but it seems to me that law matters because it defines and confines the exercise of government power. It's the way that we've figured out, and probably the best achievement of civilization, to make sure that the massive power of the state is going to be exercised, at least ideally, in conformity with certain accepted norms, and not just based on the whim of whoever happens to have the guns or the keys to the prison. And the doctrinal basis for refugee law in the Refugee Convention and also in our asylum laws here in the United States very much depends on what we do when the state doesn't honor that bargain, when the state starts persecuting its citizens and not treating them according to those basic objective principles. That means that the citizen not only has the right to flee, but that other countries have a concomitant obligation to let them in and give them safe harbor, a principle that's summed up by the French are always so good at saying complicated things in one word where it takes us a whole sentence. They call it non-refoulement, which I think literally translates to something like not forcing someone back. Similarly, once they're here, our system recognizes that when the state seeks to restrain someone's liberty, whether by locking them up or by expelling them from our shores, the state has to do it in conformity with substantive law and with due process. We also recognize that due process is not self-executing. We don't trust the government to do the right thing because its heart's in the right place. We create a system, which I think honestly is Judge Stahl, I'd be interested in whether he agrees on this since he lives it every day, but it always seems to me that the best way humanity has come up with to make sure that the governmental respect of liberties remains in place is that of adversarial presentation in front of a neutral decision maker. And that's why it's not just law that matters, but lawyers. Because while we can sometimes expect ordinary people to represent themselves in front of our government, our immigration law has now grown so complicated, so reticulated, so counterintuitive, so variable from circuit to circuit in this country that ordinary Americans have a hard time understanding it. And then when you couple with that the fact that newcomers to our country are often unfamiliar with our language, with our traditions, with our culture, it's just simply impossible. So I'd like to speak to those of you in the audience who have not, unlike my distinguished co-panelists, devoted your lives to this area of the law. To those of you who, like me, will in your day job do other things. Don't feel that this work, the work that you're hearing about, is only something that these talented practitioners can do. You can do it as well. Immigration, in my experience, is one of the areas in which having a lawyer is just utterly transformational. Just walking into an immigration court and saying, I represent the respondent, fundamentally alters the nature of the proceeding. So for those of you in private practice who are thinking about going to law firms, thinking about being law professors, you have the ability to communicate within the framework of the law, to convince a judge, to negotiate with, to rebut, to argue with the government in a way that your client can't possibly do on her own. You can marshal expert witnesses, fact witnesses, evidence, the sort of thing you are taught to do in crafting an argument. That's what you're trained in. And so if anything that you hear today is inspiring to you, if any of it resonates, I would strongly encourage you to take on a pro bono client and help her. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julina, and I want to echo thanks to Sabi, Debbie, and everyone at HIRC for organizing this wonderful panel and for inviting me to join. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces back on campus. So what I wanted to talk briefly about today is a community that I was very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with. This is a community that I believe Susan brought up, which is survivors of sex trafficking in the Chinese immigrant community in New York City. I see some nodding in the audience, so I think some of you may have had contact with some of these survivors or these clients. I think what I want to focus on most is their interaction with asylum law and with practitioners. As many of you know, there is a rampant problem in New York City, but also everywhere in the nation, of unscrupulous attorneys who make themselves out to be, experts in asylum law, who file, very organized applications, who know what they're doing, who get successes. Unfortunately, these are the practitioners that prey upon vulnerable communities, such as survivors of sex trafficking. So when I was working with these survivors, we actually found that a lot of the traffickers themselves, whether they be massage parlor bosses, hotel pimps, karaoke bar owners, they actually had connections to asylum practitioners, people who made themselves out to be lawyers, mostly in Flushing or Chinatown areas of New York. And this was a way that we saw that they were able to provide misinformation, a lot of information that scared our clients, scared them into complying with what they were told. They were continuously told to provide payments in terms of the work authorization, in terms of fingerprinting, in terms of the interview. They were told that this is a procedure that you should be honored to take part in, because not everyone has a chance to apply for asylum. Not everyone has a chance to get work authorization upon applying for asylum, which we know is just simply untrue. And so this was a way that we found that they kept our clients in perpetual debt, so that they had to continue working in the massage parlors, continue working in the hotels, servicing Johns who came for sexual services. And so I think that the work that you guys all do, and my esteemed panelists that we all do, is very important, vitally important to correct misinformation out there, especially in this age, right, where there's a lot of fast-changing policies, guidances, rules. I think even practitioners have a hard time keeping up sometimes with all the changes, especially in this administration. And we just want to make sure that we present accurate information to our clients. We do not panic them with misinformation, and that we get them on the path to a proper asylum application, which many of them, they had legitimate stories of persecution in their home countries, but these were not the stories that were presented in those asylum applications. 9 out of 10 times, the stories that we saw were forced abortions or forced sterilizations back in China. And honestly, probably half of those times we found that they had valid persecution claims based on domestic violence in China. And these claims were never presented on paper to the adjudicators. So I think, again, the work that you guys all do is so important, and I thank you for all the work that you do.
Hi, my name is Ijetu Balde. I got asylum through Harvard Law School Immigrations, and I brought in my kids, my husband, so now I'm a U.S. citizen. But when I got my asylum, Sabi connected me to Greater Boston Legal Services to help for interpretation with the client from my country. So which took me, make me in connection with all the women from my community to reach me about their problem. So I got a lady who came here. Her husband helped her to get a visa, come as a visitor. She came in, and the husband just grabbed the passport, the I-94, all the paper that she could use to have something, a legal stand in the U.S. He took everything from her, and now, you at my house, and you got to do what I tell you to do. And she was there over 11 years. Last year, she reached me and explained everything to me that, listen, my husband does not want me to get legal stand. He's not helping me. He's abusing me. He's doing this. He's doing this. So she was in Memphis. I said, okay, let's come here so we can try to see what we can do. Then I refer her to Greater Boston Legal Service. She got all the help that she was step by step, having health insurance for herself, her kids, having shelter, putting the kids to school. So she was comfortable. But the other part was that she does not have no legal stand, and that she didn't get the chance to go to school, so she can't even not express herself the way that a lawyer can understand what she's going through and how to get her something. So on the other side, the husband just went and reported a missing lady with 4 kids. And they got to look for her, looking, and finally they found her. 2 days ago, I was in my workplace. I have a daytime work, and she called me, I'm in a big trouble. they are about to deport me. I said, what's going on? He said he went to the immigration. I said, I ran away with 4 kids. It's just like what I want to say is at some point, we women, because of like when we got here, we don't know what to do. We don't know to whom to talk. Then we got abused, and you feel like people are not understanding your feelings, and sometimes it go to the point that you are completely lost, and like not having the help that because of this time it's just like it's a deportation case, and I'm like, I was just like a bottom of, I'm like, I don't know. And the lawyers over there are Great Boston Legal Service, they help for what they can do, but not from what they cannot do. And we try, it's just sad. I feel so happy for myself, but when the people from my community got to reach me and talk to me, I'm like, I'm crying for you, and I just like, sometimes I don't know how to help. Because you got something you need, but the other side is just very, very miserable.